Hi, everybody. So first of all, I'd like to thank Jonathan for the invitation to be here today. As he said, I'm all about transparency. So I'm the Vice President for Research at MIT, so in addition to overseeing all of the research on campus and out at Lincoln Lab, I'm also responsible for all the postdocs at the Institute, and in addition, I'm responsible for MIT's relationship with the federal government. So I spend a lot of time in D.C. I talk to my parents every Sunday night, and when they say, "Where are you going this week?" If I say only Washington, they say, "Oh, well, you're not traveling this week then." So in addition to that, I also chair the National Science Board, which oversees the National Science Foundation, and it's a presidential appointment. I was appointed by President Obama. I now work for President Trump. I also worked for the Clinton White House and the Bush White House. So I can work with anybody, and I feel science, education, technology, the things that I care about, they're not even bipartisan issues, they're nonpartisan issues. It doesn't matter which party is involved. They ostensibly support those things. They have somewhat different priorities, but there's just the government isn't functioning well right now, and because of the partisan polarization. And in fact, my op-ed in the New York Times today, which addresses the government slowdown and how that is a threat to the science, education, and innovation engine in the country, just because of all of the indecision, which results in a lack of long-term planning. Okay, and so I, we're in that op-ed. I quote three presidents: Reagan, Trump, and Kennedy. And my feeling is that we need to move forward. Okay, we need to move forward in what we want to do. And I personally am not interested in just hunkering down and waiting until the next election. There are some worthy goals of the current president, and we at MIT are trying to work within those. They workforce issues, education, and science and technology and innovation. So let's talk about the budget then. So there is no budget, as Lindsay said. The FY17 budget was passed last April. The FY18 budget we're in a continuing resolution for, and the FY19 budget, the president's FY19 budget, was supposed to have been released on February 5th, but because of the government shutdown, that has been delayed until February 12th. So it's been delayed for a week, and it doesn't matter what the party is. Okay, every president's budget is dead on arrival. Okay, because Congress makes it very clear that Congress develops the budget, and the president's budget is generally used as basically an articulation of presidential priorities, and it is usually used as a starting point to develop what actually turns out to be Congress's budget. Last year, because of some of the cuts, the level of some of the cuts that were recommended, it really wasn't used as a starting point in the negotiations. And I spent a lot of last spring, well, February, March, April, in D.C., talking mostly to appropriators, and it didn't matter whether they were Democrat or Republican. They were both basically supportive of the same things. They had somewhat different priorities, but the staff were, once they got some guidance, the staffs knew that they could go in a room and come out with a budget in 2 weeks, on the House side, and then the Senate side, and then another 2 weeks, and they would reconcile both the House and the Senate. But they have to have some budget guidance in order to do that. So let me talk a little bit about what the potential effects to MIT are of, I'll say, last year's budget, which has been released, has not been passed yet, and then the tax cuts. So last year's budget called for a 22% cut in the National Institutes of Health. That would have been devastating. Part of that cut was for a 10% cap on indirect costs. Okay, and indirect costs or overhead is one of the least understood things imaginable. But the fact that there was a call for a 10% cap on those costs caused everybody on Congress to actually educate themselves on that, and now there is strong bipartisan support for paying indirect costs. And so anybody can understand indirect costs, and I'm going to explain them to you, so you will understand them very clearly. Okay, so in a research grant, there are direct costs and indirect costs, and if you add them up, that's the size of the grant, okay? So a direct cost would be the sum of Jonathan's salary, okay, supporting Jonathan's postdoc, supporting Jonathan's graduate student, okay, and then the materials and equipment that he needs to have in his lab to do his work, okay, and the tuition for those graduate students as well as the stipend. So the indirect costs are costs that are not easily attributable to one grant, okay? So what the federal government does is it lumps a lot of things together. So for example, the MIT biology building where Jonathan is, the building wouldn't exist if it were not for doing the research there. So some amount of that depreciation of the entire building, which has lots of grants associated with it, goes with that. And then human subjects research, all the compliance, insurance, all the federal regulations to make sure that he's not mistreating animals, all those things go into indirect costs. And instead of, you could call them out for every grant, but it would be an administrative nightmare. So they get lumped together, okay? So fortunately that didn't happen. In the tax bill, they instituted a tax on the endowment of the 32 largest private universities, and it's a 1.4% tax, which to MIT translates to $10 million. It's a very worrisome state of affairs that a nonprofit institution is being taxed, because basically a third of MIT's operating budget and similar universities' operating budget comes from endowment returns. It will get larger and larger amounts of endowment returns are used to actually operate the university. And this includes financial aid for students. So at MIT, any student whose parents make less than $80,000 come to MIT tuition free, and that's a third of our students, okay? 91% of MIT's undergraduates receive some amount of financial aid, Okay, so and an endowment is not like a bank account. Okay, an endowment might sound like a big number. However, many parts of the endowment are targeted. So a donor gives funding for a scholarship for a student of whose grandparents were Greek, because it's a Greek donor. So much of the endowment is very targeted, very specifically, so can't be used just generally. So that is very problematic, and it's also possible, and we don't know how it will be realized yet, so there's a great deal of uncertainty here, that there will be changes in people's charitable giving terms, given what deductions look like, and it remains to be seen how that will be manifest.